Welcome to this session, which is rather dramatically entitled Terminator or Tech Hype, AI in the Apocalypse. My name is Sandy Starr. I'm Deputy Director of the Progress Educational Trust, which is a charity that works in the fields of fertility, genomics, and embryo and stem cell research. And I'm also the author of a recent pamphlet about AI. Now, this session, building on one that took place in this room this morning, which was about innovation, this is the first in a whole series of discussions about AI taking place at this festival throughout the entire weekend. There are 3 this afternoon alone. So we don't have to tackle absolutely every aspect of AI in every session. We can take it a little bit easy, a little bit steadily. And in this first session, as the title suggests, we want to grasp the nettle and look at various alarms that have been sounded about AI, particularly over the past year, keeping in mind all sorts of deliberations that have been happening in Washington, in Brussels, all sorts of public statements and open letters signed by the great and the good. There was a high-profile one in May that effectively said if things go wrong with AI, it's good night Vienna for all of us. And this same statement was quoted and reiterated last week by this man, by Rishi Sunak, in a speech he gave at the Royal Society. And that speech relates to the AI Safety Summit that the government is holding in Bletchley Park next week. So all of that's going on. But while that's going on, I think we in this room, we at this festival, need to make sure we get to grips with this subject as well. We can't just leave it up to those other people, those other institutions, those other deliberations. And so before I introduce our speakers who are going to help us do all of that, I just want to make a couple of things clear. First, there are going to be people in this room who know loads about AI. They're immersed in the subject. There'll be others in this room who know next to nothing about it, bewildered by it, have come along to find out what all the fuss is about. Whichever category you're in, you're very welcome here. If anyone uses any jargon and doesn't explain it adequately, just ask. There's no stupid questions when it comes to technology and terminology. So that's the first thing. The other thing I thought I had to acknowledge is that it's very easy to put a word like apocalypse into a session title, but the word has got different connotations following various international developments and particularly events in the Middle East this month. Now, there are discussions at this festival that are addressing that situation directly while we are talking about AI. But I still think it's legitimate for us to consider whether the evolving international context makes concerns about adverse consequences of AI less significant or alternatively, perhaps more significant. So having got that out the way, I will now introduce our speakers very briefly in the order in which they're going to speak, but I encourage you to look at their full biographies on the Battle of Ideas website to find out about their many accomplishments. There's one speaker listed in your print brochure, Tracy Follows, who's unable to join us today and has asked me to convey her apologies. But we still have 3 brilliant speakers. First, we'll hear from Dr. Elizabeth Seeger. Elizabeth is a research scholar at the Centre for Governance of AI in Oxford, and also a research affiliate at the AI Futures and Responsibility Project in Cambridge. And what all of that means is that it's her job to think about the things we are talking about at this session. So we're glad to have you. Then we have Professor Ulrike Tillmann. Ulrike is an eminent mathematician, and among her many other titles, she is director of the Isaac Newton Institute for Mathematical Sciences in Cambridge, chair of the Education Committee of the Royal Society, fellow of the Alan Turing Institute, and a spokesperson for the Protect Pure Maths campaign. And then finally, we have Dr. Norman Lewis. Norman is a visiting research fellow at the think tank MCC Brussels with a particular interest in innovation and technology. He's held roles at companies including PwC and Orange, and he runs a wonderful Substack publication called What a Piece of Work is Man. They're going to speak for 5 to 7 minutes each, and then after that, I'll invite questions and comments from all of you. So if you could please start us off, Elizabeth.
Awesome. Lovely. So thank you very much for having me. To start off the session, I want to talk about three main subjects. I'm going to launch straight off talking about this apocalypse issue. Is the existential risk posed by AI a genuine concern, or is it just hype? Then I want to move on to talk about model sharing. Who should have access to use, build on, and modify increasingly capable AI systems? And then third, talk about the UK AI Summit that's coming up. Is it focusing on the right thing, and is the UK even the right place for it to be happening? All right, first off, existential risk, genuine concern, or hype. Existential risk posed by AI can be thought of any extreme risk or any risk for extreme harm to society or even physical harms that could be caused by AI. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about these kinds of extreme risks. For example, AI systems being used to develop new pathogens or mount massive cyber attacks that could bring down critical infrastructure. And getting a sense of whether or not these are real issues that we need to be worried about it's a really difficult question. And this in large part has to do with the black box issue. In general, we're not 100% sure how AI systems work. Interpretability research, so looking at the inner workings of AI systems, is really difficult and lags behind where the frontier of AI research is. And what we find is that when new capabilities emerge in AI systems, often this is happening unpredictably. We'll even test a system for a long time and then put it out in the wild for everyone to use, and new things start happening that take us by surprise, and these are called emergent capabilities. So it's really hard to actually make a comment on how worried should we be about the more existential and catastrophic risks that AI can pose, because we don't know exactly what's going to emerge. So then this asks the question, should we really be worried about it, or should we be worried about other current risks from AI that we're experiencing, like risks from bias, discrimination, the use of AI systems to spread disinformation, things that are harming society in a very real way today? And I think like my 2 cents on this is that specifically for the reason that we don't know what's going to happen with these systems, it is prudent to assume that there is a possibility that more extreme risks could emerge. And this is in part because we're already starting to see indications of these kinds of risks. So you can take a model that's used for drug discovery and take the one parameter that optimizes to make things non-toxic and say optimize for toxicity, and now you have a toxin generator. And this is a very small model. You can imagine this extrapolating forward to larger, more capable models. So there is concern about these risks. We're starting to see indications that can be thought of as harbingers of what might be to come. So I think it's wise to take these risks seriously and to start putting policies and measures in place to sort of scan for where these risks might start to emerge so that we can be prepared. So this would be things like setting up safety standards and even model sharing standards to identify, okay, if this technology is starting to get too risky, maybe this one shouldn't be shared, or this one shouldn't be released to the general public. All right, so this leads me to the second point I want to talk about, which is model sharing. Part of the AI safety existential risk debates, there's a tension right now about whether increasingly capable AI models should be open sourced or closed source. So open source would mean that anyone is able to download a model. So that's the model code, model weights, model architecture, which allows them to be able to build on the model, to modify it for different uses. And a question of whether that should be allowed or whether these models should be kept closed. Certain safety standards would have to be met and restrictions on how these models can be released. And there's some reasons for wanting open source model sharing. For example, it allows more people to evaluate the models. It allows people to help make models fit different needs better. Also distributes control over how the systems are being used. You don't necessarily want just a handful of large tech companies with complete control over what could be a transformative and extremely economically lucrative technology. How can more people benefit economically and through the use of these systems? And then also distributing access to these systems could really drive forward safety research and capability research, give more people access to the system to develop it. Open sourcing has been a thing for a long time, specifically with open source software, and open source software basically provides the foundation of the vast majority of the technology we use today. So there are definite benefits to being open. The risks, however, is that with open access to a model, safety restrictions and filters can be taken off, which could lead to misuse of the models, proliferation of flaws and dangerous capabilities. And once a model is open sourced, that is an irreversible decision. You can't then un-open source the model. So if there is something with a dangerous capability attached to it and you put it out there in the wild, that's kind of it. And then you have to deal with what those consequences are. All right, so with my last minute and a half, let's talk about the UK AI Safety Summit. The UK AI Safety Summit is focusing on the more extreme risks that could be posed by AI, specifically risks posed by malicious use, loss of control. So this is the idea that AI systems might be able to replicate autonomously, operate autonomously without having a human in the loop, and the extreme risks that these could pose, existential risks to humanity. So there is an argument right now. A lot of people are angry, saying that the UK AI Summit is focusing on the wrong thing. It's distracting from the very real risks that we're facing today in focusing on these speculative risks. I would want to defend this on one point, in that when it comes to trying to coordinate the distribution of technology, especially technologies that pose extreme risks, it takes global cooperation and coordination. So if you're going to have a global AI summit, I think it's good for it to focus on issues that require global AI cooperation. The other kinds of risks that AI poses, like risks of bias and discrimination and job loss, these are definitely global risks, very serious risks. They are risks that are faced globally, but very often can be achieved by more local regulation and intervention. So I guess what I'm saying here is, like, if there's going to be a global AI summit, let's have it focus on the issues that require global coordination to evaluate. The second issue is, should there be a global AI summit in the UK that actually focuses on these more extreme risks? Is it too distracting? Again, I think it's prudent to take these risks seriously, given that we are seeing harbingers of them emerging. Whether the UK is the right place for this to happen is another source of debate. One of the arguments for the UK doing it, that the UK often puts forward, is that the UK is, one of the AI superpowers. I would argue that even if, let's grant the UK number 3, there is still a huge gap between 1 and 3. And I'm not sure what the likelihood of catching up is. That said, I think the UK is a really good place to have conversations about AI safety, and this is because the UK does have a very large pool of domestic expertise in AI safety, in AI governance. This is largely because of the academic institutions we have, the AI safety startups that we have, and with the establishment of the task force, we have lots of people that have been brought in internationally with AI expertise already working on these issues. So when it comes to talking about safety and evaluation, I think the UK definitely has a role to play and could provide a very good example.
Thank you. And I'll clarify that the task force you mentioned, Elizabeth, that's the government-established Frontier AI Task Force, which is very much bound up with what's happening at this summit next week. Ulrika, what do you think?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. I have to admit, when you started the introduction and said, some of you in the room will be expert and some will be novels or not particularly well informed, I was wondering which category I was actually belonging to. So Elizabeth is clearly somebody who has thought about these topics a great deal. Let me just briefly say where I'm actually coming from to make, I think it's sort of like being open in a way about my position. I am very much a mathematician. I've come from Germany, studied in the States, and now here for 30 or some odd years as a mathematician in universities here. So this is my angle, and where I have come towards maybe AI, it's actually really early on. I was already studying computer science and logic within computer science. And indeed, you have to ask yourself, what is artificial intelligence? And many academics would say there's no such things as artificial intelligence. Machines are not intelligent. They do not understand. And so when the Turing Institute was first founded some 7-8 years ago, I got involved as the chair of the first program committee. And it was very important for us, well, at that time, by the way, it was just called the Institute for Data Science. Now it's Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. But when there's a new subject area like data science, you ask yourself, where does the science come from? What does it build on top? And certain things are quite obvious, namely statistics, and that's a basic one that it's building on. You need computers, so computer science is an obvious one. Engineering is similarly close there, maybe even physics with that. And then, but then there's, from my point of view, you can see, it's also mathematics. And when there are new ideas, it's often the very basic foundational mathematics that comes in, partially to give us real understanding, partially to give us new ideas. And this, for example, certainly happened when we, computer science effectively was founded by Turing as one, and he was a mathematician in the first place, right? So it's this evolvement. But mathematics, I think, has this explanatory part that artificial intelligence and data science can bring to it. And so I guess I'm coming from a relatively neutral point of view to this question, whether we should be worried about artificial intelligence or not. So I suppose my main point would be I wouldn't be catastrophizing. We should maybe look at history. I mean, there's definitely a big change coming on. And I think history is always a good way of trying to understand where we are maybe at the moment and taking our lessons. So the Industrial Revolution, I think, is one of the big things that come always to mind when there are changes in pattern of work. Marx was certainly had some wild ideas built on that and was apocalyptic. And in some sense, maybe because of his worrying words, there was socialism, socialist reform, and people like Bismarck in Germany, etc., founded a welfare state. So when there is a catastrophe inside, I believe in humans finding a new way. Another one is really well, dare I say, nuclear weapons. I mean, that is a huge power that suddenly technology or science brought about. And we had to learn how to live with it and regulate it internationally as we understood the power of it. And so I think, again, if artificial intelligence is moving that way, and some aspects you can see, I guess you alluded to the conflict in the Middle East. I mean, one of the problems was that I think Israeli defense broke down, and I think they probably would say, yes, our defense, our intelligence effectively broke down, and probably AI had part to play here. But I think another thing that we should learn from history, it's sometimes not the experts who are really the ones who can foresee the future. I remember when the 2008 crisis, I was talking to somebody at a dinner, a banker, and it was just early on, so I thought, well, yeah, it's my chance. I asked him for some just general advice for the woman on the street, effectively. What do you advise? I was thinking of maybe some financial things, you might say. And he told me, well, buy barbed wire and weapons because it will be chaos and disruption. So I'm glad to say he had, couldn't be more wrong. So I think we have to take things one step at a time and keep a cool head. I suppose, from my point of view, from the institute I'm in, in the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge, it's a visitors institute which brings in many, many different scientists from all over the world to study and work with UK mathematicians. And we have different topics, and they have ranged from all sorts of things, the heart, the pure mathematical things, but also just in the last year we had a program on the mathematical foundations of artificial intelligence and also data-driven engineering. So I truly believe that mathematics can help us keep a track, try to understand and not treat artificial intelligence as a black box. I think that is what you alluded to as well. We try to understand it and keep control of it. And maybe I forgot about time. My last point I want to make, I started off with what is artificial intelligence? I said, what is data science? But now you can also ask, what is mathematics? And I think the thinking, especially in the Royal Society, they have a program called Mathematical Futures. And this program very much is thinking about what is mathematics, especially also education of mathematics in schools. What will it look like in the future? So I encourage you, there's a discussion paper out, and I encourage you to have a look. And one point of taken there is that mathematics has to also include algorithms, which I think it always had, actually, but maybe not so explicitly, but also data science. There's more data out there. We have to teach our children how to deal with it, how to get the best out of it, and think about data. So I think I've just stopped there. Thank you.
Thank you. Norman.
Thank you. I want to start with a very simple proposition, which is this, that I don't believe that generative AI is a threat to the future. I think the real threat to the future is the belief that it is. And that is my starting point, because I do think that there is something very dangerous going on here. And to follow on from what Ulrike's just said, the real danger is coming from the experts. It's the experts who are suggesting that what we are seeing now in generative AI, in large language models, ChatGPT, are the embryonic beginnings of what could become super intelligent machines who will, and in the words of the guy who's been appointed as the head of the government's AI task force, a threat to humanity in the future, that they will, like Terminator, take over and will come for us. Now, you don't have to be a mathematician or an expert or anything to realize that this is just plain bonkers. This is just plain hype. It is an exaggeration which goes beyond stupid, because the idea of moving from ChatGPT to superintelligence is about bigger than the gap between the Earth and Mars in terms of the intellectual or intelligent leap or gap you're going to have to make that a sustainable argument. The first thing I would say about this intelligence is that there is no intelligence. I think Ulrike kind of pointed to this. ChatGPT does not understand anything it is saying. Right? It is predicting on the basis of algorithms, generating letters and words according to large databases of what is likely to be the word that follows the one before, the predictor. It has no agency. It has no understanding of anything that it is saying. It's got no self-awareness. How such a machine is going to impact the world as if it has agency, as if it can transform anything other than a human being asking it questions. Now, that's what you've got to ask yourself. The whole thing is driven by people. There's the very famous example of the New York Times, and my God, he calls himself a technology journalist, Kevin Roose, I think his name was, who had this long conversation with ChatGPT 3, I think it was. I don't want to malign ChatGPT 4, but in case it comes back and sues me. But and he had this conversation where, at the end of the conversation, ChatGPT told him he should leave his wife, that he should, when you analyze the conversation and actually followed it through, I mean, if I was, I would tell his wife to leave him. This guy is holding a mirror up to himself. It's because he believes that human beings are so bad that the only thing that we can create is an intelligence that's going to reflect the dark side of the human condition. And therefore, it's going to result in some kind of malign advice, or it's going to act in that way. Just ask yourself for a minute, we can have a philosophical debate about whether this technology can ever gain intelligence in the form of human consciousness. I think that's an interesting debate to have. I, for one, don't believe that's the case, but I might be wrong, and I'm quite open to hear contrary opinions on that. But the idea that this thing can become this kind of super intelligent being is not an expression of the innate potential of artificial intelligence, which I am, as I have to say, am a great believer in. I do believe this technology has fantastically transformative potential for the future. But the idea that this thing that we have today is now got to the point where it can pass the Turing test, which is, can it be indistinguishable from talking to a human being? What it indicates to me, as far as these experts are concerned, is that it's not the machines that have passed the test, but that the human beings have failed the test. That's really the point. Because what they're really expressing is a diminished view of what it means to be human, of what human consciousness is, what human agency actually is in the world. And this is really worrying, because if this is the mindset with which we are going to regulate this technology, then what we are essentially doing is we are closing down human ambition. We are basically talking about a diminished intelligence. If generative AI is going to pose a threat to us about our freedom, about what our consciousness might be, what creativity might be, then what that might suggest to us is that we have to up our game somewhat. That this is actually saying we have got to become better, not that we have to diminish ourselves so it can emulate us as a diminished agent, rather than it having to surpass us in intelligence. Why do we assume that this superintelligence will turn on us and take vengeance against us? Why do we assume that? Why do we assume that it has to be necessarily a malign influence? Why couldn't this intelligence create a new Beethoven, or a new Bach, or a new Byron? Why are we thinking that this thing is going to come and attack us, and it's like Terminator, it's going to extinguish the human race? And my suggestion is this, that what is informing this, and this is really what bothers me the most, is a real misanthropy. Which is something that permeates the whole of our culture today, which is that we actually see human beings as the problem, not as the solution to the problem that we have. And that therefore, why should we emulate these people? If these people were honest, and they really do believe that this is where we're going with this technology, then forget about AI safety, forget about task force, close it down, stop it. Criminalize any more AI work. Because if that's where we're inevitably going, then the only responsible thing to do is to stop it, not to think about how can we ring fence this or whatever. Final point I want to make is it's not just the misanthropy that bothers me, but there is a lot of extraneous dynamics around the whole regulation of AI. Which has got nothing to do with AI, but it's got everything to do with politics and geopolitics, etc. And that is this. I've been working in Brussels, and I'm examining what the EU are doing, particularly in artificial intelligence. And they're at the very forefront they were the first ones to come out with all the frameworks for the harmful scenarios, etc., around their Artificial Intelligence Act, which is in the process of being passed now. The problem with this is this. The EU is nowhere in the quest for artificial intelligence. It has no technological capability of doing any of this. The only thing the EU can do is regulate other people's technology, because by gaining access to the market in the EU, it's what's called the Brussels effect. They can force big tech to do certain things if they want to participate in the EU market. So what the EU is doing is they are asserting their regulatory power as a way of immersing themselves in the geopolitics of AI, which is becoming very, very important for the future. And the consequence of that is that they are not driven by an understanding of AI. They are not driven by a wish to themselves become AI generators. They are there because they are concerned. The precautionary principle, which is enshrined in EU law, is based upon the very simple proposition that if we don't know what the outcomes are, we should not do it, or we should limit it. And therefore, what's happening here is we have this groundswell of activity which ultimately is about limiting AI. It's about limiting the potential. And I, for one, am totally against that, because in history, if we know anything about the history of technology, every technology that has been transformative has been good and bad, can be used for good and bad. When mankind discovered fire, did he know then that fire would be used to burn people at the stake, or in the ovens of Auschwitz, or in fact in the kibbutzes in Israel? No. Fire can be done. Knives can be used to cut meat. They can also be used to kill teenagers. Every technology has this. And the attitude you have towards this in society is what determines whether this will be transformative and how this might benefit society in the long run. Thank you.
Right, those are three contrasting perspectives, to say the least. I'd like to ask the three speakers stuff, but I'll let you have a first go.
Thank you. So I might be one of the experts that Norman mentioned. I was invited for interview with the AI task force, but they weren't so interested in my research, which is partly about interpretability. So in answer to some of Norman's questions, think about how much more intelligent GPT-4 is versus GPT-2. GPT-2 is 2019. GPT-4 is 2023. That's 3 years. It's a lot more intelligent. What do I mean by intelligent? You asked that question. Very good question. Very hard to say the answer, but a pretty reasonable definition is how many parameters does it have? That's not a foolproof definition, but the number of parameters that an AI has. Okay, if you don't know what that means, just think of it as a number. GPT-4 has about 1 trillion. I think it was the first AI with more than 1 trillion. And this is the way that you phrase some of this debate, because we know that a 1 trillion parameter model is
Hamish,
not that much of a threat.
I'll pause you. You're speaking later as well.
Yes.
So put a point to the panel now.
Yeah, I will.
You'll
Okay.
have your say. Go on.
The point is, what do you think of the idea of having a moratorium against AIs with more than 1.5 trillion parameters? That'll be my question. I mean, my understanding is that the argument in favor of having more parameters is that, the AI gets better, it causes economic growth, people can use it, etc. But, well, okay. And by the way, the goals of an AI can be very different to our own. Look up the paperclip maximizer if you're interested in this.
Could I just ask the panel a outsider question, because I'm not a technologist. And my question is, what is intelligence? I know a bit about the definitions of intelligence, and what strikes me about a lot of the definitions of intelligence is they talk about adaptation of means to ends, but they negate the fact that what I consider intelligent behavior is a definition of your own ends. So I'm just interested, if we're talking about artificial intelligence, what is our definition of intelligence that we're using. And maybe if we introduce the concept of human freedom to intelligence, maybe AI doesn't look quite so scary.
Okay.
Somewhat surprised that none of the panelists explicitly mentioned the alignment problem to which this gentleman in the front alluded. But the fundamental thing that potentially makes AI unsafe is what is called the alignment problem. I see someone nodding, which is, in principle, the idea that a thing that is an agent, in other words, a thing that has its own goals and is trying to do something for itself, if that thing conflicts with things that other people are trying to do, and it's more powerful at doing those things than those other people, it can harm those other people, right? That's the alignment problem, and if you have an AI that is so intelligent that it is powerful enough to override other people because of an extreme arbitrary level of intelligence, it can do literally anything to achieve those goals and can trade off an arbitrarily small benefit to itself for an arbitrarily large amount of harm to everybody else. That's the fundamental problem. But the important thing to note is that is not a problem that is unique to AI. That is a problem that exists wherever you have agents and with conflicting goals, even other humans who are very powerful over other humans. And it's actually just the principal agent problem in economics in a particular application. And the most obvious source of that problem in modern times, because we don't have a superintelligent AI or anything that's currently close to it, is government, those who have arbitrary power over others. And governance safety is precisely the same problem as AI safety. And governments who have power to control AI are especially dangerous, precisely because of the amount of power that AI can give governments. And so the problem of AI safety is precisely the same as governance safety, and it's extremely dangerous to think that governments controlling AI is a way of making it safer without also addressing governance safety as the same problem and realizing the two things are of the same magnitude.
Thank you. I think interesting speakers, but maybe the fourth speaker who's not here might have made this point, and that is that, so when you talk about, the hype and bonkers of AI and the claims for it, well, there's a counter there to say, well, maybe that's arrogance. When you say human arrogance, you say misanthropy, I say, well, you're arguing for a special position of human beings from the human perspective. And I think if you're trying to work out, whether artificial intelligence is going to be truly intelligence, and just quick aside is that I had a coffee a few days ago. I asked the barista, could I have artificial sweetener? And she looked at me and she said, oh, we don't have that. We do have sweetener. I said, I'll have that. See, this is the thing, is that when you use the word artificial, you're implying made by man. You're implying that it's not going to evolve possibly even by itself once given a bit of a kickstart. So if you look at people and you look at machines, Alan Turing showed a long, long time ago that all machines, all computers are equivalent except for speed and memory capacity. And if you're going to say that there's something special about human beings, you've got to say, what is it? Is it we're endowed by God with a soul or a magic spark or some unknown science like Penrose said about quantum mechanism that we don't yet understand that gives us intelligence and that? Well, so just very, very briefly, I want to compare humans with machines. So a human being, 1.5 liters of brain, very big, very slow, lots of neurons, but very big, very slow, okay? And our brains consume about 100 watts, and that's important from kind of an entropy kind of thing. You can only do so much with 100 watts, okay? And we communicate between ourselves at about 120 words per minute. That's the best we can do, okay? Look at a computer. You can have warehouses of very fast, very small transistors consuming megawatts, okay? And they will communicate with each other with millions of words per minute. Now, what you've got to say now, what is it special about human being? Is it the soul or the magic spark, okay, or some unknown science? And you've got to say that. And my conclusion is that you...
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, we get it. Okay, I'll let there's a lot on the table. I'll let the speakers come back both in response to that and in response to one another, and then I'll come back out to you. Now, some of the questions we have here, what is special about humans? What is intelligence? We can have a go at them. We're not going to resolve them to everybody's satisfaction in this initial discussion. Other things that have been raised include the alignment problem. But it's interesting to think how that relates to agency, whether it presumes a certain degree or a certain type of agency, and whether there should be a moratorium on AI that has more than a certain number of parameters. But come back to whatever you like. I might start with you, Elizabeth, and then move back through, please.
Okay. So there was a lot there. I'll try and touch on a few different points. And I'll start by responding to the question of why assume that AI systems are going to turn on us, and use that as a starting point. I would say that the people who develop AI systems and are worried about AI governance, we're not assuming that AI is going to turn on us. We are acknowledging that one possibility of advanced AI development is that we develop systems that are terribly unaligned with human interests and values, and that in developing these systems, if we're not careful, they could cause significant harm. The flip side of this, however, is that, okay, so the question is, if they can cause such harm, why are we continuing to build them? And that's because of the flip side of these powerful systems can also provide extremely great benefits for humanity. So the question is then tackling the alignment problem. Let's make sure that these very beneficial systems are aligned with human interests and values and goals. So then this brings us to the question then of intelligence and self-awareness that was brought up. What does it mean for a system to be intelligent? Very difficult question, an entire field of study in philosophy called the philosophy of mind that tries to deal with this question. I think it's a little bit perhaps beside the point. We more need to think about what the capabilities of systems are and how they can impact us. So then this came to the question that the other panelist asked around self-awareness, and I would say that something does not need to be self-aware for it to be dangerous. The question isn't whether or not the system is self-aware, it's what its capabilities are. So, I mean, the vast majority of like the extreme risk that AI systems are posing that people are worried about are risks from misuse. This is how people are going to misuse the systems. It is a dual-use technology, good and bad. So then to come to the idea of regulation, the goal of regulation then is not to regulate the AI itself that might go out and do something untoward. The goal of regulation is to regulate the people who are developing AI systems, who are using AI systems, who are making decisions about what systems should be developed, what systems should be released, and whether or not we should check for certain capabilities before they're released. And so then I'll end on the point of a moratorium. There's been several letters that have been released asking for moratoriums on AI development at certain points in time. And this comes back to the question of like, why are the same people screaming about existential risks the same people that are building the systems? First of all, I'd point out that there are actually quite a few people building these systems who have signed the letters for moratorium. Then why are they continuing to build them even though they signed this letter? I think that there's sort of like a white knight aspect going on here where people say like, well, listen, if those guys are going to keep building the system, then at least let me get there first, because if I get there first, I'll do it the right way. And there's obviously a problem here, which is why regulation would be great to actually give some guidance on how these decisions should be made. So, I don't know, base question, should there be a moratorium? I would say right now, not immediately, but I think we need to get a lot better at benchmarking, which means understanding and being able to identify when certain capabilities start to emerge so that we know when to throw down that gauntlet if necessary.
Thank you. One thing I know from my day job is, a little like you said, Elizabeth, about, if a bad AI gets out, or an open source powerful model gets out, you can't undo that. It's very hard to undo a moratorium, in my experience. It's not something that's very easily done. And who has the authority to do it is not necessarily clear either. So I'd keep that in the back of our mind. But Ulrike, is there anything you'd like to come back on?
I think this question about intelligence is, I agree with Elizabeth, it's not relevant to the question of today in a way, because it's just about, it's just maybe a bad name to call it artificial intelligence, and it's about these systems and computers and that can be used. And their capabilities. I have to admit, I don't really have a view on a moratorium. I think we really would have to ask exactly the question, who could impose it? And I assume those will be the people or group of people who would then possibly also undo it. But with these sort of things, it's always a question, of an arms race, right? I mean, if you don't do it, and the people who adhere to your moratorium don't do it, that's fine, but how do you prevent others? So I think that there's always that sort of question in the back of my mind. I found actually the comment about AI safety and government safety quite an interesting one, because I think AI is very much used and misused around international democracy. We know, or we assume that there has been tampering with elections, and I think just general artificial intelligence and it can be both used from both sides, of course, to keep things in check, but also to be misused. So I think it's a very important aspect, and I think I still believe in democracy effectively, and that governance systems must be allowed to act. And in that sense, I would also reply to the question, or to some of the remarks made earlier on. Why does the EU maybe have some ambition in this area? Effectively, it's just like a government, right? I mean, it's a body that will have to try to come to grips with safety arrangements, and it can do so as a broader governmental body that spans more than just one country. So I think we need to work on that, and also trust in the democratic systems that we have built up in the past.
I'll let you pick straight up from that, Norman.
Thank you. Well, I think the term artificial intelligence is probably the worst marketing job that's ever been done. It is so disingenuous, because it's not intelligent in the sense of human intelligence. And more than that, when we're talking about computational statistics, that's what we're really talking about. Maths, algorithms, etc. Why not talk about that as advanced computational statistics? That's what it is. It's not intelligent in the sense that there is no agency. These machines, and it's very interesting that the gentleman raised about how much energy we use. How much energy ChatGPT uses to do a single task of putting text together. Not anything that the human being, the complexities of what we do on a day-to-day basis, which we don't even think about, in terms of our ability to process the world around us, to interact with the world, cause and effect, understand that our agency, the intelligence that our 2-year-old children already have, which doesn't, ChatGPT is not even infinitely near that capacity. They're single-issue machines, are they not? You can teach one of these computers to beat someone in Go, but then ask it to solve something that it hasn't been given the parameters for, and it doesn't stand a chance. And the point I'm making is that human intelligence is infinitely adaptable. It's about interacting with the world and acting upon the world, and understanding, having the presupposition that your actions can therefore change the world and yourself and everything around you. That's the magnificent thing. The question you've got to ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, is what problem are our AI experts trying to solve? I think it's a really good question to ask in any innovation. What is the problem that's being solved here? Is the problem human intelligence? Well, if it is, then we've got a bit of a problem, because how are you going to solve the problem of human intelligence without human intelligence? How are you going to create something that's going to be smarter than you when it has no capacity, it has no free will, it has no self-awareness, it has, whether it ever will is debatable, but at this point in time, it's nowhere near that. And so all we're doing is we're projecting a view onto this technology, which I don't think it deserves, because I think this technology has got enormous potential, and I'm a great advocate of it. My concern here is that this kind of Frankenstein, Terminator perspective is one that's going to force us into very bad regulation, because we're going to close things down before we actually even know what the capabilities of this are. Think of the use cases, and you just go back, look at the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act, the 3 areas of harm, and look at what they have already defined as the areas that cannot be done around. And you know already that these are use cases that are based on the present. We're projecting the present as if this is the future. And we know that that's just not how things work. And as a consequence of that, what we're doing is we are limiting, what we are really limiting, what is so unique to us, is our ability to imagine. It's the limits of imagination that is trying to be curtailed here. And that is really, really disastrous for the future.
Sorry, I arrived late, and I don't know if this has been covered, but would the panel concur with Daniel Schmattenberger's analysis that the alignment problem is best exemplified by the paperclip problem? Did you guys cover that?
They didn't. No, just do it brief, very brief.
It'll be quick. No, I'll keep it very concise, I promise you. Paperclip problem. AI, a factory that makes paperclips has set the AI the task of how do I increase output. The AI comes back with a brilliant, brilliant solution nobody saw coming, which was it reduced the entire cosmos down to the raw materials of paperclips and turned the entire cosmos into paperclips. His point being that it doesn't have a sense of context. We set it a goal, and because it doesn't have empathy, probably, etc., it works within a limited bandwidth. That's where the problem is, because the gentleman on the right phrased it in terms of vengeful. The problem with AI, I don't think, is that it has any intent or is going to be vengeful. The problem is the Moloch concept, which Schmattenberger proposes, which I think you may have covered.
Yeah, I agree with you, Norman, that the idea that AI will become intelligent or self-aware is nonsense. And I would just say to the parameter guy in the audience, at what point does the addition of complexity and parameters turn into intelligence? A billion more? I mean, and then what's the reason for that? And no one's been able to explain it. Because the fundamental thing that's happening in a piece of technology like an AI machine is fundamentally a material process, which is fundamentally no different than what happens in the heart of the sun. And in what sense could either of those things ever transcend themselves? No one's ever been able to explain that to me. So parameters is just a non-explanation to start with. But that's precisely the problem, perhaps, Norman, which is that it's purely material. Now, I think you have a straw argument there, which is to say that, we think it's going to become malign intelligence. Well, we don't have to turn to malign intelligence in order to see that material processes can harm us as if it were a malign intelligence. Take animals. Animals are pure machines, in my opinion, and I think Norman might agree with that. However, we do have a situation where we have autonomous kind of systems like locust plagues and so on, and evolved tigers, lions, and bears, which do hurt us and can harm us. Now, if the capabilities are important, the AI could become autonomous and become something which has no intelligence, no self-awareness, but harm us nonetheless in the same thing that other things that are purely material but not intelligence can harm us, like animals and viruses and so on. And you yourself admitted, Norman, that though AI is not intelligent and has no self-awareness, it does reflect what people think already. For example, he told him to leave his wife. Well, what if it reflects society at the moment? And I think you'll agree, society at the moment is pretty misanthropic. So that poses perhaps a danger, maybe?
I think one of the problems we've got is anthropomorphism. This need to humanize machines. From the very early stage in education, children are taught that the CPU is the brain of the computer, or that RAM is memory. These are anthropomorphic terms. And if you think of an everyday use of technology like, say, a sat-nav, or a smart speaker, gives the illusion of persona. But actually we need to explain that underneath it, it's the fundamentals of computational thinking. It's input, process, output. It's reacting to stimuli, it's giving an expected output. I think that we need to sort of get into these terms a lot more so that we can counter these ridiculous, preposterous, apocalyptic ideas which are so far-fetched and away from reality. But I think a good starting point for us is to become grounded in science and make a good case for what's actually in front of our very eyes.
Hello. I just wanted to refer to Mr. Tillman about AI not being such a threat to the future, and we're not sure in whether we know AI's capabilities. Well, you don't have to look too far back to the Slovakian election this year, where a AI deepfake conversation was created between the liberal progressive leader of the Slovakian party and a journalist called Taboba. It was put out on social media by a far-right Slovakian party, and the Progressive Party ended up losing. This, with the UK and American elections next year, and we already know fake news had a huge part to play from Russia in 2016. What does that have to do for the next year's elections? And it's not only a danger to the future, but also democracy, and also the issue of AI stealing our personal identity. Tom Hanks raised a very important issue of him also being deepfaked. And the BBC ran a really interesting video and article about scammers adopting AI and the fact that you can pretty much create anyone else's voice. So my mum or my friend could create a voice and tell me to send money, and they're in danger. This is AI. It's already here. The dangers of AI aren't in the next 10, 20 years. They're posing huge dangers to our democracy, and also we need to create things about protecting our personal identity, like we have with protecting personal data on Facebook and Twitter.
It's interesting that when we're supposed to have a net zero crisis, that we talk about 100 milliwatts or whatever from the brain, and we conceive of energy as an index of intelligence. That's not true. It's also interesting that now the postmodernists have completely taken over the curriculum, that language is fetishized and turned into a god, to the extent that what is computational language analysis that Norman referred to is taken as intelligence. That's not true. Intelligence today should mean something to do with action, to changing the world. It's not just to do with deep fakes. We've got enough real fakes in person of Boris Johnson or David Lammy not to worry about the deep sort. What we should be thinking about is peculiar to human intelligence and distinguishes it from the quote-unquote artificial sort, is a consciousness of the past and of the future. Does artificial intelligence have any ancestors? Does it know about its ancestors? Is it a cousin or a second cousin once removed? No, it's not got any conception of the past or of the future. That conception of humanity is something we owe to Hannah Arendt. Secondly, I've only got two more. Secondly, does it have any conception, machines, artificial intelligence, of moral judgment? Would it be able to make a proper moral judgment about the Hamas attack on the 7th of October? And finally, is it able to use language that is so fetishized by language's admirers in a way that involves gesticulation, intonation, and the way in which language structures thought? Those physical sides of language we owe to Oliver Sacks, the psychologist, and the fact that language and communication isn't just communication, but also structures our own thinking, that we owe to Vygotsky. All of these human characteristics are something that AI cannot get anywhere near, and we need to be sober in our judgment of that.
Yeah, so I just also wanted to go on this parameters thing, because I found that incredibly sad. Just what is intelligence? It's parameters. And I think I really liked your idea of bringing the history of mathematics and AI a bit to the fore so that we can, well, some of that apocalyptic thinking, but I wonder if we also need a better understanding of like human history and a history of human intelligence, and find out what it is, because it seems to me that much of my generation is very ill-equipped to deal with something like AI, because everyone's very deterministic in their thinking, and everyone does seem to have very deterministic view of the future. And I wonder whether we need to get, into more discussions about ideas in a place like this and all that, and stop thinking about intelligence as parameters, because I do think that that's incredibly sad.
Right. There's so much going on in a way, and I think for me the main question is actually, and I'm not going to answer any because I'm not a philosopher, I don't know what intelligence, can give you a clear definition on intelligence. I know what I know about it. I know agency is absolutely important and purpose, and I don't know whether a machine ever can, whether I will believe a machine can ever do that. But I think the real question, I think, should be, we have many global and huge problems to solve in humanity. And the question should really be, can these machines, and I'm not going to use artificial intelligence in this context, can these machines, can data science help us to solve these? And they're hugely powerful. Then, of course, anything that's powerful can also be misused. And so the question then becomes, how can you regulate and foresee misuse so that you can, at the same time, protect yourself against these misuses? And in some sense, maybe I alluded to that earlier on, it's good that somebody says, has some apocalyptic view, as long as we then jump onto the train and be aware of these things and be prepared of the real dangers that might come, namely the misuses. And I still believe in humanity. We can actually solve these problems, possibly again by using the same tools, of course. And so maybe let me finish there. I do feel like human intelligence, we are the agents, we are still in control of these things, and we should use our intelligence and our collective will to move things forward in a positive direction.
Norman?
Well, yes, I would echo that 100%. I think, when Elizabeth spoke about regulation, about regulating people and the use of these things, I think that is correct, because we should get away from this idea that somehow, this technology, AI, is going to trick itself, and it has agency. It's going to kind of trick its way into our vehicles or into our hospitals. It has, it's got like benign, this kind of idea that it can do this. These systems are deployed by companies and governments and entities, just like any other technology, and they should be held accountable for whatever that technology does or doesn't do. If it results in harm, they should be held accountable for it. It's very, very simple. We've been doing this for many, many years. We have rules on the road to protect one another. We can have regulation around how these systems can be deployed, and if they go amiss, that there's compensation or whatever. There's nothing new in that. I think that the people who are talking about deep fakes and the threat that this is to democracy, I'm not going to deny that it's true that some of the capability today is quite worrying, that they can create artificial videos, etc., emulating voices, etc., and that this could, in some instances, result in people hearing a message or hearing a view that they think is coming from the genuine article. I think there is a problem there. But if you think about it, the real threat that there is to democracy today is not from these systems. It's from the lack of belief in democracy that our elites have. It's the fact that we have an EU that is passing legislation which is going to control who can advertise, because it's going to control what can be said, who decides what can be said, the very opposite of the kind of free speech that we require in defense of democracy. This is coming from our politicians, from our elite. It's not coming from the technology. And the idea that this is the threat kind of misaligns us thinking of what the real problem is here, which is that our elites themselves don't trust us. They think that we are too thick to be able to distinguish between a video that's created by AI and the real thing. And I'd suggest that if anybody's got critical faculties and can listen to an AI-generated whatever blob talking rubbish and not be able to distinguish that from real ideas or whatever. The problem lies with us, not with this machine.
Elizabeth, is that true?
Okay, actually, very specifically on the point of are we too thick to distinguish between real and fake, the answer is resolutely yes. There have been multiple studies done just asking people to, is this one real or is this one real? And we would actually do better by flipping a coin. So it is very difficult to distinguish, and these technologies are only getting better. I'm going to start from the very beginning. Around the intelligence question, is AI a good term? I'm happy to grant that artificial intelligence is just a misleading term. It really kind of drives conversation off the rails and gets us focusing on the wrong things, distracting from the main issues, which are the risks and the benefits and if and where regulation should be in place. So on the topic of regulation, I just want to emphasize regulation, the role of regulation, it is not trying to shut AI down. It is not trying to shut AI development down. Regulation is about trying to maximize the benefits while mitigating the risks. And sometimes the best way to maximize the benefits is to blow a technology wide open, give access to everyone so that everyone can drive and innovate and drive that innovation forward so that people can develop downstream applications that serve their specific needs. Regulation for restricting AI comes into place where the capabilities become such that they could cause extreme harm, and we need to be careful about how we're implementing, how we're releasing these systems. As far as regulating people goes, yes, regulation is to regulate people. It is to regulate people sometimes so that those people don't accidentally develop an AI system that could act autonomously and harm people. And then finally, on the topic of elections, coming back to the deepfake things, personally, I think one of the biggest issues for the 2024 elections isn't necessarily going to be the specific impacts of the technology we see, but in how people respond to the existence of the technology. A complete disintegration in trust of key information streams because you don't know what you're looking at. Is it true? Is it fake? And I think that'll make for some really interesting communication dynamics. Last thing on deepfakes, it's not just about deepfakes right now. It's not just about is this picture or is this video real or fake. One of the problems that's emerging right now is called compositional deepfakes, where AI technologies are used to develop entire histories behind a particular deepfake. So the idea here being, let's say you see a video of a politician saying something that they didn't really say, and so you go look up, you're doing your due diligence, quick Google search to see if it's right, and you find blog posts and web pages and news articles all corroborating this, and then you click on the journalist in the news article to see if it's a real journalist, and then there's a whole biography written about this journalist. It becomes really and this is all fake. It just becomes really hard. So, yeah.
Yeah, I used ChatGPT to try and write a satirical article about the climate change apocalypse theory, and it came back and did a satire about climate deniers. And I kept trying, and it went on for about 20 minutes, and I gave up. So my question is there a danger where AI is using all the information that's available on the web now, and it's almost like a capsule of time, and whatever the culturally dominant theme is, it just replicates it. So there's a danger that we'll actually just get stuck in time, and we're not in a particularly good time right now.
Right. The War Games film from the 80s, I think that's a concern. The Israeli Iron Dome system, that is stimulated by a rocket and acts automatically. So I do think AI is a big risk to that. I wonder your thoughts on that. Is there a risk of everything being plugged into the internet? And is the safety thing, and hopefully at this Safety AI Summit, the solution will be just stop plugging everything into the internet. These phones can be hacked, that's public knowledge. Pegasus, a fire alarm system that's not plugged into the internet cannot be hacked. I'm just seeing AI systems being fed with books about hacking, and then countries seeing each other's vulnerabilities and blackmailing villains doing the same. I'm surprised this hasn't been mentioned with respect. So maybe the solution should be stop plugging everything into the internet for AI safety. Thank you.
I'm actually a former law enforcement intelligence analyst who taught the John F. Kennedy case, and I have raised recently the need to alert from the point of view of keeping trust, to keep a close watch out for AI-generated fakes of the Zapruder film. But my question, I've worked in Ukraine and reported on the war, commented on the war, broadcast on the war, is the idea that countries like Iran, Russia, and China would respect a moratorium strictly for the birds?
Okay.
Hi, I think I have a question for Elizabeth. I really like your idea about regulations and also is regulating people. And I just wonder if we need international regulations, and if we do, is it even possible? Is it going to be something like another UN, can really enforce it?
Yeah, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is what Rishi recommended it should be in his speech on Thursday.
Hi, I have just a question for all the experts here in the room. There are just a few companies who are powerful enough to develop really great AI machines. Could that be a problem for democracy?
Okay, concluding thought. I'll conclude with a thought on international regulation. I think international regulation will be necessary, especially for when it comes to how systems are distributed and whether they are kept opened or kept closed. For very similar reason as you need international regulation for something like nuclear non-proliferation. Information about the technologies gets out, dissemination of capabilities, harms can distribute widely and quickly. So yeah, international regulation will be needed to make sure that any kind of policy that's put in place stays effective, including the possibility of a moratorium is specifically something that would need international regulation to be effective.
Concluding thought, please, Ulrika.
I agree. Maybe let me just touch on this idea of democracy. I think that is a big danger. And coming back in some sense to your point, about AI regulation and safety and governance safety, I think we do have to also acknowledge that whenever there is new technology on the block, then there is also a danger to misuse it, especially in elections and for political reasons. And I just remind you, the radio was quite new. Germany, 1933, was definitely a huge factor then, and people didn't yet quite understand how to react to it, and I think that's what you sort of also said. And then in terms of a positive way, I myself used, in some sense, new technology at one point, namely email lists, very simple thing. We were bullied by a journal, and we tried to get out of it as editors, and we resigned all en masse. And the email that we were able to send immediately to everybody in the field just killed the journal. That wouldn't have been possible before. The journal was very surprised. They tried to stay on, but they didn't. It's called topology. You can read it on the internet. It's not fake.
And finally, Norman.
Well, I think the question that was asked about ChatGPT, the data sets that it's being trained on, the limits of what that knowledge is in terms of how far it goes, is a very, very important point, because of all the things that people are saying about parameters and blah, 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 what is really being posited here is that you have this machine that can be trained on a fixed set of data that will develop intelligence that will be able to go beyond that data? No, it can't do that. It cannot do that. It just cannot do that. What you're really doing is you're saying that the existing knowledge is it, and that all that these things can do is play with the existing knowledge, because it has no understanding of going beyond what that knowledge is. And that's precisely the potential of what this could do as an adjunct to human intelligence. That's the point. The fundamental thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is us. It's about what we will use these machines for, not what these machines will replace or do instead of us or in place of us. It's how we can harness this incredible capacity to solve real problems. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is to solve real problems. The problem is not human intelligence. That is not the problem we have to solve. We've got many intractable problems that need to be solved. And what my biggest concern about regulation based upon this apocalyptic notion, this complete hyped myth notion, is that we will be pushed into bad regulation. regulation that will limit our capacity to think about, to experiment, to do the kinds of things of finding solutions that we don't yet even know exist, because that's what the history of technology has always been. We have always gone beyond what we thought were the limits. If we limit our imaginations because of fear, and I suspect that the experts who are driving this are doing it for very selfish reasons, because they want to maintain the monopoly that they already have today. That is really the beginning of bad regulation. This is not a good idea. The idea of an international panel like on climate change for AI safety, I mean, that is the most moronic idea I've ever heard, because that's not going to result in good regulation. It's going to result in the politicization of AI. It's going to result in the closing down of discussion rather than the opening up, which is precisely what they've done on climate change. That's the last thing in the world we need.
Can we please now thank our speakers?